Welcome to part 4 of chapter 7 video presentation. In this part we will discuss some important examples of internet companies, and we'll try to classify those companies into different categories to show the most typical business models that are possible, that historically have been possible within the internet realm. Now, one way to divide internet companies, especially the ones that were pioneers in the dot-com arena, we're talking about companies that took off in the internet space somewhere between mid-90s and late 90s. So one way to subdivide those companies and their business models is provided here on this slide. So there are the so-called pure dot-com companies, pure internet companies. Those are the companies that were born in the time interval between mid-90s and late 90s. Most of them are pure internet companies, which means that most of their operations, but usually not all, most of their operations are done online. And those companies typically had little or no history prior to the growth of the internet, of the so-called internet bubble. Two prominent examples of pure dot-coms, pure internet companies, although once again people may argue to what extent they're pure dot-coms and to what extent those companies also operate in that physical realm and maintain physical assets. So two examples are Amazon.com and Netflix.com. Now, the second category of dot-com companies, again primarily engage in B2C applications over the internet, are traditional catalog companies, and the examples of traditional catalog companies include Dell or Dell.com and also Lands' End. Now, those companies were, it can be argued that these two companies were neither pure internet companies because they existed somewhat before the boom, especially Lands' End existed way before the emergence of the internet bubble in late 1990s. So those companies were more or less traditional companies that did not rely much on physical presence when it comes to sales, when it comes to reaching their customers. For example, both Lands' End and Dell, throughout their early history, they used traditional catalogs, like printed or electronic catalogs, to sell their products. So that was their way to bypass traditional physical retail environment and reach consumers directly. Now, naturally, when internet became popular, both Dell and Lands' End, they jumped onto this new platform and started offering their products through the internet, first in a catalog-like fashion where people could just select those products online. But then Dell.com and Lands' End, they went well beyond that basic use of the internet as an electronic catalog, and they started offering mass customization options online. I actually remember when it started, I remember whenever I was looking to buy a computer, I could never find the exact configuration that I wanted. It was either too powerful and too expensive, or not powerful enough, and I couldn't find the configuration that meets my needs. I could go to a smaller shop, the one that would assemble a computer for me, but I always had those doubts and fears that they're overcharging me or using old components. So I remember there was always a big headache. So when I realized that you could buy a custom computer from Dell.com and select the exact configuration that you need and have this computer shipped to your house, I was really amazed. I really thought it was something akin to magic. That Dell.com model was revolutionary at that time. So that's the second category of dot-coms, internet companies engaged in B2C applications. Now, the third traditional category is comprised of companies that are not necessarily internet companies. They're traditional retailers, traditional companies with physical presence. And when the internet became popular, they just started exploring that internet realm and moving a lot of their operations, or most of their operations, online. So those are very traditional companies in a sense, that nevertheless took full advantage of that internet revolution. And by the way, a lot of those traditional companies, they were more successful than most of the early dot-coms because they had the infrastructure, they had the business culture, they had the expertise to benefit from this internet revolution to a greater extent than all of those young startup companies. So they just waited until things settled down a little bit. They waited for the dot-com bubble burst to kind of wipe out all current and potential competition in the form of those newly formed internet startups, and slowly, gradually, at a low cost, started entering the internet with their presence, with their products. So some of them were quite successful. Now, so this is like all categorization of .coms. So one thing that is missing from this category, I would say, well, actually a couple of categories are missing. Something related to social networks, although you can say that social networks, they fall into this pure .com area. I think this is something separate, because nowadays I think a lot of business, a lot of digital products, a lot of software applications are actually driven by that revolution in social media. So that's what I would add to this classification. So this is one way of classifying .coms. Now let's talk about some prominent companies. Some of them are listed here, and we'll use a slightly different classification. We'll try to put those companies into a category based on what exactly they do online, and not where the origins are. This is something that this classification seems to suggest. It classifies .com based on origins. Now, the first big category are the so-called .com retailers or online retailers. For a long time and up to now, Amazon has been used as a poster child of internet companies, and especially when it comes to online retailing. Now, some people argue that in many ways Amazon is not a pure .com, it's not a pure internet company, and there's some sense in that argument. Number one, from the very beginning, Amazon realized that they cannot be a pure internet company. They need to make a heavy investment into the physical infrastructure involving warehouses, logistics, technology supporting those warehouses and logistics. Otherwise, they're not going to be viable as a retailer. So as you probably know, Amazon has a very strong physical presence in terms of storage and warehouses across the world, especially in the United States. For example, the Commonwealth of Kentucky has quite a few of those centers, regional facilities for making deliveries for Amazon. So yeah, some people argue that it's not like a pure .com company because Amazon has a substantial physical presence. Also, from the very beginning, and Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, he has been always clear about that. They didn't define themselves in terms of being an internet company. They defined themselves in terms of being a consumer-facing company. In other words, what Jeff Bezos used to say is that Amazon was so successful and great not because it was on the internet, but because they always put serving customer needs at the forefront. So everything that they did on the internet, everything that they did with data, with their technology, was about improving customer experience and giving people the best service possible online. So that's how they define themselves. So now, Amazon is on its way to become one of the largest retailers in the world. If not, maybe it's already the largest retailer. It's definitely competing with Walmart, and I'm curious to see how this competition will evolve. I think as of now, Walmart is still slightly bigger in terms of revenues, but my prediction is that Amazon will overtake Walmart soon. And I think both are great companies. It's just that they're operating in different spaces, different realms. As you well know, Walmart is more about physical presence, while Amazon is really big online. I think what's going to happen, there will be a demographic shift where the new generation of shoppers will be more inclined to shop online, and this older generation who are used to buying things in a physical store will be not as numerous. So that demographic shift, I think, will give a big edge to Amazon, and eventually Amazon will become the most dominant retailer, just like Walmart was for the last couple of decades. Now, Netflix. I think Netflix is a better example of a pure .com because everything that they do is digital. So they sell digital content, they stream digital content. They do have physical infrastructure in the form of servers and telecommunication equipment and digital storage facilities, but largely their business is about transmitting digital content across large distances. Before Netflix, if you remember, there was another prominent company in this area called Blockbuster, the company that specialized in rentals. At that time, those were VHS videotapes. Some people say that Blockbuster did not see Netflix as a threat. I think they did, because I know for a fact that Blockbuster was trying to establish a presence online, just like Netflix did. They were actually trying to partner with a company called Enron, which was an energy trading company headquartered in Houston, Now you would imagine, like, what does energy trading have to do with Blockbuster and digital content? Well, at some point, the company, I'm talking about Enron, became so confident in their abilities to trade commodities, which included electricity, oil, gas. They thought that they need to enter that internet era by trading another important commodity, which is internet bandwidth. So they were trying to partner up to establish that network that would allow Blockbuster to stream its digital content across the United States. I think it never took off, and eventually, as you probably know, Enron was prosecuted for accounting fraud, and all of its executives went to jail. Like Jeff Skilling, he got the CEO of Enron, he got 27 years of jail. He just recently got out. He didn't serve the entire sentence. And then Andy Fastow, the CFO, got 10 years of jail. So those plans never materialized of partnering with Blockbuster, and eventually Blockbuster lost competition to Netflix. And now Netflix is being pushed away by a lot of similar companies like Hulu. Hulu is also like a pure .com. But then I noticed that there are more traditional media companies like Disney who are trying to enter this realm and compete with those early digital streaming companies. Dell is a catalog retailer. Once again, I already mentioned that was like this company was one of the pioneers in the .com space. They tried to sell PCs, meaning personal computers, by eliminating intermediaries, meaning physical stores. At first, it was done through catalogs, but then they started using internet, not just as a substitute for a physical catalog, but also as a platform for offering mass customization. Again, that was a pioneering effort, and arguably Dell and maybe Lens End, to a lesser extent, were those early pioneers that gave birth to that mass customization movement. Yeah, Lens End, you will read about Lens End in one of the cases that I'm asking you to read for this course. It used to be a traditional catalog seller of clothing, and then they developed this capability to exhibit their products online and then to customize their products, such as pants and jeans and some other clothing items. So that was, again, similar to Magic for a lot of consumers, where you could customize your own clothing in terms of the sizing, colors, the fabric used. You could even put your own logo on it. So that was another important pioneer, another catalog retailer that pioneered that emerging industry of mass customization. Then another category are store retailers, meaning those are traditional stores that nevertheless entered the internet realm and started offering their products online. Staples is one of them. It was a traditional office supplies company in 1980s. When they saw this opportunity in selling their products online, they launched their online site in 1998 and late 90s, and then gradually most of their business shifted online. So in 2006 it was 25%. I think now it's more than 25%. Tesco offers a similar example. It's a grocery supermarket based in England, UK. They were a bit late when it comes to entering the online space, so it was after 2000. But nevertheless, they entered this realm, and although they had early challenges trying to sell perishable goods online, they became very successful online. And again, a lot of their business, although historically they have been a traditional retailer, traditional groceries supermarket, now they're becoming more of an online company. Now, one company that is worth mentioning, and we already discussed it briefly when we talk about store retailers, is Walmart. Now, superficially, when you look at what Walmart is doing, it's an amazing company when it comes to lowering prices and offering like selection of goods. Although it has been criticized for some of their unethical managerial practices, I think they're when it comes to their low-cost business model, they're really an amazing, well-entrenched company. They've been pushing towards this goal of constantly lowering prices for decades, and they've been quite successful. However, you cannot help but notice that they're obviously losing the online competition to Amazon. Nowadays, Walmart does have a substantial online presence where they're trying to sell their goods online. They also seem to be running something along the lines of a platform similar to eBay, where their partners, their vendors, can also sell something through Walmart.com. But it's clear to me that they're losing competition to Amazon. I think they're still quite strong. They are well entrenched, but as I mentioned before, as the demographics shifts towards younger people, people who are used to buying things online, I think they will actually lose grounds to Amazon, and I think maybe they're already at that point where Amazon is surpassing them in their dominance and their revenues. Now, another important category of online companies or dot-coms are intermediaries, like platforms, auction-like platforms where consumers and businesses can trade with each other. So it's both B2C and B2B type of platform. eBay started as a small community of collectors where people would trade certain collectibles, things that other retailers and other consumers did not see value in, but eventually it became a very big worldwide auction. Again, they're losing grounds to Amazon because Amazon seemed to be quite entrenched in that B2B area as well, because Amazon used to be all about B2C, but now there are so many vendors, so many companies that are trying to sell their goods through Amazon. So that obviously takes away business from eBay. Now, the last time I've checked, eBay is still doing well. I mean, they're not declining, they're still growing a little bit, but of course their growth is not as spectacular as the growth of Amazon. Google is another important company in the internet realm. When people think, everybody knows what Google is. It's a search engine founded by two PhD in computer science students, Sergey Brin and Larry Page. In fact, this whole project emerged out of one papers that Sergey and Larry wrote as a part of their doctoral studies. So they were suggesting this algorithm where page links serve as votes in relation to importance of a particular web page for a particular search term. So this research project led to this idea of establishing a search engine, and I'm sure you know the rest. Now, when people think about Google, they think of it as a technology company. They think of it as like a corporate R&D lab, and that's true in many ways. But usually companies are defined in terms of their business model, where their revenues comes from. And with respect to their revenues, Google is a media company, more specifically an advertising company, because the last time I checked, most of their revenues comes from those online ads and from nothing else, from no other products. Over the last couple of decades, they've been trying to branch out into other businesses like wearable computing. Here I'm talking about this Google Glass project, self-driving cars, which is now a separate company, I believe. But again, online advertising is still something that defines Google. So they're an advertising company. Now, Facebook is also an advertising company. Again, the last time I checked, most of their revenues came from ads. They were not successful in offering products beyond content monetization, although there were some attempts to develop games, and I think they're still getting revenues from those games. But it's advertising that generates most of their revenues. Now, of course, Facebook seems to be losing traction to other important social networking platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and things like that. I think it's still number one, and regardless of what comes after Facebook, I think it's safe to say that was a groundbreaking company. Although it wasn't the first social networking website. I mean, many people may remember a website called MySpace that was quite popular way before Facebook started. Before MySpace, there was Friendster, and there were a number of other websites, classmates.com, that was very much along the lines of a social network. But it is Facebook that made the social networking a mainstream, right? So in that way, it's a prominent company that defined that social media, social networking realm. And I think we as consumers, we're still living in this era of social networking. So this is something that profoundly influences our personal lives, our interactions, professional interactions with peers, the way we buy things, the way we're influenced by ideas. So we're still in that realm. And I think the only thing that is emerging nowadays that seems to be overshadowing Facebook, maybe the era of artificial intelligence, maybe that's something that will take us one step beyond. In fact, a lot of theorists, a lot of scholars are saying that the most powerful explosive combination will be when artificial intelligence starts acting as independent entity on social media, where artificial intelligence can create fake profiles with fake images, can create fake news and influence people, right? So that's the dangerous part. But of course, maybe artificial intelligence can be put into a positive news. Maybe it will be something on the positive side where artificial intelligence will help us detect fake profiles, fake news, all those manipulations. So yeah, I would say social media is still number one trend when it comes to e-commerce and the way people do business online, and the way social interactions are fostered online. So that completes part 4 of chapter 7 video presentation. Thank you for listening.